Thank you, Madam Chairperson and Co-Chair. In fact, I'm quite happy to see as to how this whole session began with a wonderful presentation by Prof. Deepak Mishra, followed by Dhiraj and Animesh and several others who really worked on the question, and there is a thematic integration of issues, which we could see emerging from all these presentations. I would just like to confine my presentation this morning on two important issues, and these are only hypotheses. I'm not saying that these are conclusive, but understanding the situation around us, particularly the way the developments have taken place, particularly in the last 2 decades all over the world, and particularly in India. So it has implications for how we should be visualizing the social geography of India. Now, it goes without saying that, since one of the sub-themes of this session is social well-being, let me start by making a few comments on social well-being. Well-being refers to a whole range of issues, but one of the most important consideration that we have to keep in mind, both theoretically and empirically, that it was in 1976 when the idea of the basic needs were being talked about within the framework of the welfare state. Now, welfare state has retreated, and therefore, the welfare mechanisms, the way it was proposed under the federal structure of governance or in the governance model, has undergone a tremendous change. From investing in people, there's a shift where people are now being recognized as beneficiaries. So there is an important departure that we see here from the way the state looks at the people. So instead of investing in people, where one could have seen the state investing in health, investing in water and sanitation, investing in education, there is a remarkable shift from that to creating a kind of a corporatized structure of delivery system. Whether it is water, you can see the current situation where there is a Jal Jeevan mission, which in fact has been spearheaded by the government, but the way it is being operationalized on the ground, it is basically moving into the private hands, where the state's commitment would cease after the project has been laid down, where the beneficiaries would therefore be required, so-called beneficiaries would be required to in fact foot the bill for it with absolutely no commitment to who is going to maintain those projects and so on and so forth. Similarly, one can see as to how the investment in education, now since education is being commoditized, it's a commodity, you have to purchase it from the market, so here again, there is a significant retreat. We can see as to how our investment or our expenditure on education, which was touching about 3.74 at one stage, has now come down to less than 2.5 of the GDP of India. But the larger burden remains on to the state, where the state is not in a position to foot the bill for reasons being that there has been a tremendous shift in its revenue structure, and that itself creates a kind of a situation where states are not in a position to foot the bill for public education. So therefore there is a transition and a remarkable shift which is taking place in the field of education, higher education, technical education. Government seems to be talking about Skill India, investment in skills and so on and so forth, but it remains, this has to be looked at as to what is the outcome of these investments. There is so much that is there on the poster, लेकिन पोस्टर जब फटता है तो क्या हीरो निकलता है, ये देखना पड़ेगा. This is an important point that I would like to put before you. This transition from people being seen as the citizen to people being converted into beneficiaries is something which requires a certain degree of theorization. A beneficiary, therefore, is a dependent category. Is dependent on to the state and the kind of a social structure in which the state operates, and particularly in Indian context, we have to be very, very clear that there is a remarkable shift, from the mid-80s when, the citizenship's rights were being protected by the state, where state, in spite of the social fragmentation that we see in the caste and class structure in localities, was still trying to bring about a certain kind of a network towards creating a kind of a system which would recognize both bureaucracy and the judiciary could recognize the importance of the citizen. Now the citizen has been completely taken out of question, because now the citizenship is being investigated by both, and the state therefore throws out that there are a lot many infiltrators and so on and so forth. To keep you engaged in these narratives, India has so many boundaries with sharing with several other countries. Certain amount of infiltration is absolutely possible, and there is no denial. But yet the narrative has now compounded towards a situation where many of us who may not have papers, say for example, I do not have my birth certificate. Now if I were to perhaps establish my voting rights, I will not be in a position, suppose I had not gone to school, then I wouldn't have been in a position to establish myself as a citizen. So there is a kind of what you'd call it, disenfranchisement, which in fact is taking place at a level which in fact is both suitable for the current crisis in capitalism. That's the last point that I would like to make. Professor Deepak Mishra made a very, very important point, and I would rather take that point and address this question, that the capitalism is comfortable in whatever be the mix of social and economic structure through which its exploitative mechanisms could be further deepened. My reflection on this is that in India, particularly in the North Indian states, among the North Indian states, it's also valid for the southern India. Certainly not so much valid for the Northeast India, because it's undergoing a kind of a marginalization process, or the process of integration through the policy instruments of the state in a slightly different mode, to which, if I have time, I shall come to. But the predominantly northern Indian state, which in fact contributes a very huge share of parliamentarians. In fact, that's where the decision-making process is skewed in favor of northern India. What we see here is that the capitalism, or the neoliberal capitalism, in whatever, the neoliberal capitalism is a product of Thatcherism and Reaganism and the Washington Consensus, where the state was seen to be withdrawing from, and the way we have seen it has already withdrawn from several other functions to which it had a commitment, a constitutional commitment, is now handing it over to the private sector. The government has no business to remain in business is the statement which emerged out of the Washington Consensus. But the global capitalism in Indian context relies on two important aspects. One is, of course, the cheap labor, which in fact has become one of the responsibilities of the state in a quite not a very apparent way, because the state may still be seen to be investing in education or trying to give direction through educational policies of this or that kind, but eventually it doesn't want you to continue in education, which if you look into the National Educational Policy 2020, you will be in a position to see as to what I'm really trying to say. Part of that I've already talked about in my presentation day before yesterday. But what is more important is the combination or the alliance. I would call it, I use the term miscegenation, an illegal marriage between capitalism and Brahmanism. Now this is an important, when I'm saying Brahmanism, I'm not talking of the Brahmins as a caste. I'm talking about Brahmanism as a kind of an ideology. And what is this Brahmanism as an ideology? Brahmanism as an ideology is based on a strict operation of a stratification and its accompanied rules, where those who own land have greater access to resources and they have greater power to control the labor. And this alliance between the international capital or the capitalism is something which one has to see making a return through the mechanisms of Brahmanism. Because Brahmanism remains absolutely static, that it doesn't believe in everybody having access to education. It doesn't believe in everybody having an access to opportunities, because opportunities are basically meant for some. While capitalism professed that, that it is through the mechanisms of the market that everybody could become efficiently having access to efficient ways of opportunism, of opportunities, whether these are opportunities of education or whatever, health and so on and so forth. Now that is where this unholy marriage, what I'm really talking about, if I'm allowed to use the term unholy, seems to be making some sense, because capitalism talks about the efficiency of the market and Brahmanism talks about cessation of the market, because it has its own set of rules, right? And therefore, we see this coming back. And a return of this is something being adapted by the capitalism, the way it has been operating. This is something which I would like to throw for you all as a kind of an hypothesis. And my last question is, when this, my last hypothesis is that when this combination starts reflecting itself on the scale that the length and breadth of the country, then you have spaces of marginalization. Now, these spaces of marginalization, which we used to talk earlier in terms of predominantly tribal areas, predominantly areas which have very less access to resources or irrigation, and so on and so forth, now has transformed into a kind of a multiple cells of deprivations, which are spread all across. Within an urban area, there are multicellular areas of marginalization. Now, when I'm talking about marginalization, I'm basically trying to understand the process. It is not the outcome alone. It is the process which continues to push you onto the margins. And this is something that we geographers need to understand, both spatially and temporally, keeping in mind as to how social identities and the reinvention of identities. Why I'm talking about reinvention of identities? Because in a country like ours, where there has been reconfiguration of the structure of caste, restructuring of social hierarchies, have been playing an important role. And in the mid-60s, 70s, 80s, we saw the emergent castes, taking that means the backward classes, which really understood that they have the numbers in their favor, but they had very little access to resources. They could reinvent themselves and reorganize themselves through the mechanisms or through the instruments of assemblies and parliamentary policies to have a greater say and access in resources and education. Now we see this as a kind of being ruptured through a kind of a market-oriented logic where reservation itself ceased to become effective. Reservation, mind you, was the one single instrument of the government intervention which provided mobility. Many of us may be thinking that, it is taking away my place or my job, which in fact is statistically not correct, but nevertheless it is an impression that all of us tend to carry. Our experiences tells us something, but we have to look beyond this, that it is the way the market is trying to reinvent itself in a manner that it could make the best use of what is called the Brahminical ideology, which in fact is comfortably accommodated within the parameters of capitalism, capitalist exploitation. So these are some of my concerns which I thought I'll share with you. Thank you very much. Thank you, madam.